Hi.
You can hear microphone controls will have.
1 1 1 1. Yes, testing, testing, testing. Yeah. Okay, good.
Who's actually an economist, but he has recently been doing work in the blockchain space, and honestly, a lot of the stuff he does like fits in computer science anyway. So,
yeah, thanks a lot. I should say that I'm pretty sure I'm an economist now, but it took me a while to get used to the idea. I did my undergrad and master's in math and CS a bit. So I'm an economist, but I'm happy to be here. What? Yeah. Okay, so this is joint work with Elaine and Rafael Pass. I'm an economist. I don't know distributed systems, but I try to find out people who do, and Elaine and Rafael definitely do. And we try to think about all this work about blockchains, blockchain attacks, and a lot of the work just kind of says blockchains are secure, insecure, but what's the design space? What's the possibility? What even if there's a framework model you should use to look at those things? So we thought about it a bit and kind of said, like, actually, you need a model that combines distributed system theory and economic theory, and we're going to combine those. But before I kind of tell you about blockchains, I think start with just like, why are we asking the questions, or where are we coming from? Which is like, why should you even care about blockchains? And I think this is a serious question, not just like throwing it out there. Like, there's a lot of kind of noise coming from Bitcoin. Bitcoin price goes up, goes down. Why should you care? The reason I care, as kind of an economist, is that in some sense, like, we don't really need Bitcoin to transact, but Bitcoin does solve a very important problem. Like, there's a lot of systems out there that allow us to transfer money very efficiently, but they're very costly. So the number that I kind of throw out is that the global revenue of payment providers, like the Visa, PayPal, and the like, it was $2 trillion. So that's more than 2% of GDP. That's a lot of money. And you probably know better than me that that shouldn't be the cost of running a database that just updates transactions, right? Likely it's not because of like actual cost of running payment system is $2 trillion, is because you have limited competition. Like in economics, you think a lot about network effects. The reason that you don't have a more than 4 credit cards in the US is like, if you come up with a new credit card, nobody will want to take it because no store will accept it. No store will accept a new credit card because it doesn't have customers. You have an egg and chicken. It's very hard to compete in the space. And there's a lot of antitrust. Here's some random story. Every time, actually, I didn't do this for this time, but every time, almost every time I update the slides, I just Google whether there's a recent antitrust case against Visa, MasterCard, PayPal. There's always this. Yeah. So why is blockchain a potential answer? Well, if you think of payment providers, they'll kind of have a firm, you have a firm, they run all the computer servers, they run all the infrastructure, they charge whatever they want. Blockchain is kind of a market design solution to that, saying like, instead of doing all of this within one company, let's have a platform. Anybody who wants to contribute compute power We'll call it compute power. Anybody who wants to use the system will use it as if it was Bank of America. And we'll have something in between that connects all of them. So at the first glance, it kind of looks like Uber. Right? Anybody who wants to be a driver can be a driver. We don't have the train that's kind of designated carrier. Anybody can be a driver. But it's actually a step beyond Uber, because Uber controls the marketplace. Uber decides how much drivers will receive, how much riders will pay. In Bitcoin, we don't have anybody deciding in the market level either. The market just has some design, and miners on one side compete or interact, and users interact, and we can have a marketplace that's potentially better and doesn't have this antitrust problems. And in a previous paper, we kind of looked at this, and like that's how I started getting interested in the topic, and asking, well, how much do you pay for using Bitcoin? When you send a transaction in Bitcoin, of course, there's a transaction fee. Who sets this transaction fee? Turns out nobody. It's set by something like a market. It's very far from perfect. There's a bunch of flaws there, but you get something that's a competitive market. And one of the results in this paper is because you have free entry, anybody can become a miner, you get some sort of competition among the providers that creates an alternative to a monopoly. It's hard to compete with Visa if you need to set up an entire new network of payment processors and Visa card. But if you're one of the many atoms that make a Visa and you compete among yourself, that's very easy competition. Yes, Mark?
Another last mile solution versus backbone. So it seems that Visa, a lot of the money comes from the last mile, from deciding whether chargebacks or handling kind of very low level last mile problem.
So a lot of the solutions, like one solution is like blockchain is a bit of a far out solution. Much more kind of like immediate solution is that just make moves that limit the network effects of Visa and increase competition. So making you accept any credit card or cash equivalent, or sort of like allowing third parties to issue cards and use your network, much like what was done with cellular provider. I don't know if you know, cellular provider in Israel, like about a decade ago, entered new competitors and said you can rent space from the existing operators, and we get new players to compete with you without having to do all the hard labor of setting up a network. If you do that, that's going to increase competition. There's a bunch of other tools that you can do too. India just made kind of a payment system that's available to all the country too. But there's limitations to each one of those approach. And like, if you think about blockchain, one of the ways to think about it is it's open source. Because it's open, everybody can join. It doesn't have like this antitrust limitations. And I think it's interesting to look at this kind of platform that has this kind of open nature, open competitive, especially for what do you think as kind of public infrastructure. Yeah, there was another question. Okay. Okay, so all of that is nice and good, but like, you know, that's my motivation. Hopefully I got you somewhat interested, but as you wish. But it also comes with a bunch of challenges, because when I want free entry, a network that's not operated by anybody can join, it kind of sounds like this doesn't sound very secure. And I'm gonna kind of like say this at a very high level right now. I'm gonna go through kind of a bunch of examples later on, but you can think that part of the reason that Visa is secure is because Visa is in charge. There's somebody in charge, and there's a CEO that's gonna go to jail if something goes bad enough. In Bitcoin, I say I want anybody to be able to join. All that means the bad people can join too. Can this thing even work? Can I set up a system that's going to be totally open, decentralized, anonymous, and still secure and kind of trustworthy for like users? Yeah? So of course, there's many other problems. The paper that I noted has a bunch of other problems with Bitcoin. There's kind of like, you know, you have your spreadsheet, and like Matt can give you a big spreadsheet of issues to work on. But I think that security is kind of like a necessary first step. So that's why we started asking, can we just make a system secure? Yeah. Yeah. So first thing that we want to do, or kind of like the outline for this talk, is first thing, let me just define what I mean for the system to be secure. So you probably heard about double spending attacks on Bitcoin. Not, I'll just mention them in a bit. Are those the only attacks we should consider? If you think of double spending attacks, those also have somewhat peculiar about them that everybody knows that there was an attack. If everybody knows that the system got hacked and the numbers in the computer would change, can't we just change the numbers back to the original numbers? Those attacks kind of seem like there's something odd about them. So in order to kind of formally think about what is an attack, what can we do, what can the community response, we want a bit of a kind of theoretical framework that I think has to combine some distributed system elements. So we're gonna first kind of like, I'm just gonna try to argue that in order to define what you capture by economic security, you need to set up a model that has both economic and distributed system theory. And then I'm gonna take this definition and talk about attacks on Bitcoin. I can actually do the attacks on Bitcoin without much of distributed systems. Like they're kind of pretty straightforward and blunt in a way. But I'm gonna go through them to just make the point that the environment that Bitcoin operates in does have a lot of issues that make incentives for security very challenging. Namely, if you have a setting with a lot of anonymous players and they're all small, it's going to be hard to get the right thing to happen. I'm going to show you, like, try to do the common happens. It can happen. And then, given the challenges to incentives, we're going to ask, well, can you be secure? And that's where the definition will really come into play, because then security will have some kind of formal sense of, if we know that we're wrong, then we need to kind of have the protocol know that it's wrong. And I'm going to be a bit more formal about this, but it's going to be more about, like, can different entities come to agreement with each other? Can we come to consensus? And in a sense, it's going to be, if we can catch bad people and everybody agree that they're bad people, maybe we can just ignore them. And that's going to be the way kind of that we think we should move forward. So this is super hand wavy, but we will get some positive answers at that. Okay? That's maybe what I should tell you now. Okay. So related work, there's a bunch of work in economics that talks about incentives and costs and kind of calculations of what would happen under different scenarios, but they can't really handle the design space. Most of it just says, here's kind of a given Bitcoin, or what Bitcoin is, and some assumptions about the environment. There's a long literature in computer science that says, can we get consensus, a system that operates well, the distributed sense, Lamport paper going back to the 80s. Well, you kind of think, like, I think I'm not a distributed system person, but my read of the literature is like, the motivation is like, Amazon has different data centers. Can they all work as one, even though some of them may be faulty? And then following blockchain, following Nakamoto's paper and Bitcoin, there's a bit of a more recent literature saying, well, if we think of a bunch of Bitcoin miners that are trying to collectively update one ledger, can they work correctly together? That's a slightly different setting. And they will have a lot of to add on those previous techniques, but neither one of those literatures connects with one another. And that's maybe a bit of a too strong statement, but the statements that you will get here is, here are some conditions under which the system works well. The statements that you'll get on the top is, here's some incentives that come up from some conditions, and what we wanted is just merge. Okay. Yeah. Of course, people in both literatures talked about incentives and, okay. Oh, and incidentally, I taught a class about consensus in economics. So trying to read the distributed system literature as an economist and trying to digest it to economist. If you're interested in the materials, I know it's a CS department, but if you want to talk to an economist, just send me a link and I'll give you my best attempt of translating things. Okay. So let me start from like a kind of motivation. Just like I want to capture what is economic security for some user of some kind of ledger distributed system like Bitcoin, like that. So I'm going to think of somebody trying to put some data on some ledger. I think about this as a transaction. And I really care whether the transaction actually gets into the ledger or not, gets processed or not. Like I'm a merchant, I'm trying to get a transaction, I'm trying to get paid, and I really care that it actually did go through and I got paid. I don't want to give the goods to somebody without getting payment. Let's think about what happens in a traditional kind of payment system. Let's think I'm a merchant. Somebody comes to me with a check, with a paper check. I have exactly the same problem. Somebody comes to me, they hand me a check. Should I give them the fridge or not? Like the check may be good, it may be bound. Maybe the check will bounce. Yeah? The merchant may look at all the safety measures and those sort of things. But one observation that's kind of essential to this is like, if I'm a merchant that I'm trying to figure out whether the check is valid, I'm not trying to think about what I think about the check. I don't care what I think about the check. I care about what the bank would think about the check. What I'm trying to figure out is, will the bank accept this check? If I think that Joe is a great guy, just gave me a check, I completely trust him. But Joe may have a bad relationship with the bank, and the bank will decline the transfer. Doesn't matter what I think about it. At the end of the day, I'm going to get money in exchange for this piece of paper only if the bank or whoever the processor will accept to do that. Yeah? So that's kind of like a fundamental problem that's kind of already related to the problem in distributed systems. I'm seeing some things on my part of the world. I need to understand what somebody else will think. Huh? Okay. And I'm going to call the system to be secure if the merchant can look at the check and guarantee that the bank or whoever is supposed to cash this check will actually accept it. So there's all sort of security measures here, but maybe I can never tell whether there's balance in the account that's supposed to back this check. Maybe there's always some doubt, and then a lot of places will not accept checks. Yeah. How do I build a payment system to do this? To kind of be secure and accept checks. One way is just, let's say that there's just a big stone in the center of the village, and I write all the transactions on it. And the very simple claim is that can be completely secure. Because it solves the problem that I just mentioned, that I don't know what the balance of Joe is. He comes, gives me as a check. I don't know what his balance is. If we all have the same ledger, we all see the same kind of like record, I just go, how do I check? How do I verify whether the check is good or not? Well, I go to the stone here. I see whether the stone says Joe has enough balance. If everybody can see the same stone, then we're good. Yeah. There's some other details. How do I make sure that the check is actually authorized by Joe? I can see Joe's account, but I don't know whether Joe actually authorized it. But for that, I have cryptographic signatures. And cryptography basically does all the heavy lifting, making sure that what I see is actually valid, and checking all the features on this paper check is actually like the simple part. The really hard part is like that I can never know whether that has enough balance. And the easiest way to solve it is like, okay, just display all the balances in the center of the square. Everybody can read them. Okay? But what happens if you don't have this big stone in the center of town that everybody can go and check? Huh? Anybody knows this stone, by the way? So is that a stone? I just wanted a picture of a big stone. Okay, so suppose I don't have a big stone. I need to have many copies. Now I'm basically at the canonical problem of distributed systems. So there's a lot of literature on distributed systems, but at a very high level of loss, the core question is, can I get one stone, one database, but not implemented by one computer, but a cloud of computers that acts as if there were only one? So multiple motivations for that. One is that Amazon needs to have more than one server farm, but you need to get the same result no matter which computer from whichever server farm you go to. If I refresh the page and instead of having the West Coast server answer my query, suddenly the East Coast server picked it up, I should see the same prices. I should see the same thing. They should give me exactly the same information. I should have multiple computers that work exactly as one. That gives me more throughput. That gives me more resiliency for if one of the computers crashes. And that also makes each one of those computers replaceable, which is kind of like the initial motivation that I had for Bitcoin. I want like none of those operators to be kind of controlling the system. Each one of them is a component that can be replaced at any time. So how does distributed system think about this problem? Well, the model is actually often very simple and in some sense deceivingly simple. Like it's one of those kind of problems that's I found very easy to kind of mess up because all the arguments are very simple, but they're very delicate sometimes. So you think of a system which has many nodes, computers, miners. I'm going to use all of those synonymously, players in a game. Each one of them receives messages and sends messages to the other to communicate. And think of all of them trying to coordinate to just keep a ledger, a log, or some database that's supposed to be in sync with everybody else. There's going to be some protocol that says what you need to do given your local state. All that each one of those machines can know is what messages they received and what messages they sent out and their history. But there's some fundamental difficulty that I don't know what the others saw. Right? Maybe I send the messages and the message failed, or the message got delayed, or maybe they got something and saw something that I didn't see. And the entire challenge in all those algorithms is saying, given some node I's perspective, given that node I saw some things, can you guarantee that node J will have the same database as you do? No? Can you both update the database continuously, taking some communication and precaution measures in such way that you really have the same database, although you can't really see the same things exactly? There's some maybe communication delays, maybe one of those nodes is malfunctioning or malicious and sends you contradictory messages. So maybe you don't have exactly the same observation. Despite that, I want to make sure that you see the same thing, that you agree on the same thing, that your ledger is going to be exactly the same thing. This is captured by two properties. The second one, liveness, just basically says that you keep making progress. And there's a ledger that keeps building, and you add data to this. Think of a payment system. People can make more and more transactions over time. Of course, making the problem harder, not trivial. If we just had to agree on some fixed state, and that's we call it the day. Not that much easier, actually, but like that's easier. If we keep making progress all the time, it means that we continuously need to update. We continuously need to change what our internal record says, my internal copy of the ledger says, and we need to be always in agreement how we update it. The property that allows us to talk about the ledger, a ledger common to all of us, is consistency. Basically says, if a node is honest means that it follows the protocol, follows the instructions of what the protocol tells it to do, and it finalizes the record. Finalized basically means that records come, they may be pending for a while. I'm not sure whether this transaction should be written to my database or not. But once I say, okay, this is written, this is finalized, I can never go back on this. And I must agree on everything that's finalized. So think of like there's a bunch of transactions, they're all pending. When they're pending, I'm aware that they may go or not go through. I don't necessarily have to be in agreement. But if I decided that this transaction got finalized, that product written in, that's a commitment that I'm sure that everybody else also agrees that this transaction goes through. And we must agree on that. Okay. So consistency means you agree with everything that got finalized. Liveness, we keep finalizing and writing to the database. Together, you get something that basically replicates the stone that we had before. We had this before, and we have the stone. Well, finalized means writing to the stone. Liveness means keep writing to the stone, and everybody agrees. Okay, so those are the two properties. Let me take you back to the merchant. And I want to argue that consistency is exactly what you want to capture the security for the merchant. So what's the problem with the merchant? The merchant sees a check, or maybe he receives a credit card. They have some computer in the system of computers. This computer goes through a bunch of calculations, sends messages potentially, and eventually decides whether the transaction went through. What do we want? We want that whenever my computer or node decided that this transaction got through or got finalized, everybody else will agree. The bank will agree, every other node in the network will agree. And consistency gives me exactly that. It gives that the merchant has some partial view of the world, some ability to communicate with others. Given what the protocol requires me to do to finalize a transaction, then the merchant is able to actually get this consistency among what they finalized and everybody else. Another way of putting it is, suppose somebody got deceived. Suppose somebody did a double spend attack against somebody. A double spend attack is meaningful if I got somebody to think that the transaction got through, that I did pay somebody. Suppose I do a double spend attack against Matt. If Matt never thought the transaction went through, it wasn't really an attack. If Matt thought the transaction went through while in practice it didn't, then I violated consistency for Matt. So consistency is exactly what I want to think about when I think about double spend attacks. And now if I think of this distributed model where different agents potentially see different things, now I have like my framework for thinking about what is security in the system. Basically, consistency will be. And now I need to bring in another component, because now I want to ask, what does it take to bring consistency? Most of the classical results in distributed systems give you something like if you have 2/3 that are honest, that follow the protocol, and then you can guarantee consistency. Like if some fraction of the nodes act as they should, then I can guarantee consistency. In an open distributed system, like Bitcoin, that would translate the results, the classical result, the classic result that we have. Maybe I should have it in this order. Okay, like Passim and Shalat, I think, is the paper to reference, and the result is that if slightly more than 50% of the miners follow the Nakamoto protocol, I should say 50% of the compute power follows the Nakamoto protocol honestly, then you get consistency and liveness. You get that the protocol acts as it should. There's no contradictory blocks in the network. Nobody's ever deceived. And everything is good. Problem with those kind of statements is that now you ask, well, will we get 50% attacks? Or, well, will we get 50% to be honest or not? That's completely endogenous. suppose I'm a dishonest buyer and I'm trying to deceive the merchant. I don't have it. I don't need to take for granted whether there's an honest majority or not. The system is open. It's operated by some miners that are potentially corruptible, or I can even spin up new nodes and try to change them. So to get a meaningful definition for what does it mean to have safety, I want to say I don't have consistency violations. And to guarantee that I don't get consistent violations, I can't say, well, there's going to be honest majority. I need to say it's going to be expensive enough to have a consistency violation. Okay. I don't want to take it as exogenous what participants do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take an attacker. I'm going to say, you're a bad guy. You're trying to deceive the merchant. Deceiving the merchant means breaking consistency in the system. I'm going to ask, how expensive is it for you to deceive the merchant? So I'm going to have a distributed systems model to capture this consistency notion. And I'm going to have an economic model that says, here's what the attacker can do and at what cost. And then I can ask how costly it is for the attacker to actually create this consistency violation. Okay. Yes. So in order to use Bitcoin, you need to define like what notion of consistency you're going to have. So I'm usually when you actually need to use Bitcoin, you need to say, well, I'm going to take finality as 6 blocks because at some point I'm exchange. I need to decide when to release the fine. That's my notion of finality. It's not explicit in the protocol, but I need to expand the protocol to talk about some finality. Yeah.
So now the finality are 6 blocks, and everyone agrees on 6 blocks instead of no one sees contradictory ledgers.
So I'll have maybe exactly that in a couple of slides. I can ask, suppose you're a merchant and Bitcoin does not give you what blocks, but you say K blocks. Can somebody deceive you, or how much will it cost just for somebody to deceive you under some assumptions on what can the attacker do? Yeah, maybe let me jump to that. So I want to measure how much will it cost for somebody to deceive somebody. And okay, so consistency violation can be lucrative. Let me skip that. Okay. Everybody knows how Bitcoin works? Should I? Okay. So longest chain rule, basically. Every honest miner organizes transactions into a block. Does mining? Mining just does random selection of who gets to issue a block. Whenever you issue a block, you issue it with a pointer to a previous block, and you're supposed to extend the longest chain that you know of, or one of the longest chains that you know of. Yeah? And you get some reward for every block that you get to add to the network. That's how you get paid as a miner. Yeah? One thing that really is important once you think about it in distributed system is it's possible for 2 blocks at the same time to arrive. What does it mean at the same time? Not all miners see exactly the same view of the world, because if I mine a block and I send it to Matt, maybe it takes a second or maybe longer for it to reach Matt. If Matt was an honest miner, did his best effort, but he happened to mine a block within that second, he and me will just mine blocks simultaneously, as far as we could see. And then we'll mine 2 blocks that are in conflict with each other. How does Bitcoin resolve that? That's what the longest chain rule does. Yeah? Longest chain rule comes to resolve those kind of conflicts. And to say that if we have that me and Matt mine 2 blocks that are of the same height, and now we have some conflict, somebody will mine the next block and extend one of them. It's of course possible that in the next round, again, we'll have the same kind of conflict, but if it takes 10 minutes between blocks and it's second for the block to arrive from one another, this only happens if people are honest. It only happens for honest miners when it's 1 second out of 600. So it's pretty rare event. This can happen maybe once, but it should resolve pretty quickly. And more than that, if enough of the people are honest, you can show that once a block is deep enough, you can be quite sure that there's no other parallel blocks that are going to get thrown away. So this blocks get thrown away, this continues. And if you want to say what is finality, finality is being deep enough. If you're deep enough, then I'm sure that's like we're not in this large few blocks where we can have simultaneous conflicts. This paper basically does this analysis and shows that attacker can mess with this simultaneous arrival, or kind of make the honest guys kind of waste more of the blocks because of the lag. And it really matters that the inter-block arrival time is much larger than the network lag. So the horizontal axis here is what is the network block time. So on average, how long does it take between blocks in units of the lag? So if the lag is 10 seconds, in the internet, it takes 10 seconds to send a block from one to another, then the block time of Bitcoin is 600 seconds, roughly, so 60 lags. You get that the bound that you need for consistency and liveness is slightly more than half. If you have a block time that's closer to the lag, then you need an even bigger majority because the attacker becomes stronger, it can exploit the lag. Okay. Okay. You can also ask, what happens if, like, I just have huge lags in the network? What happens if I go way to the left here? I'll talk about this in a second after we talk about attacks on Bitcoin. Okay. So let me go through something that probably a lot of you heard already, that you can do a double spend attack on Bitcoin, and it's essentially free. And there's an argument that we kind of make in this economic model. So let's say we have exactly the same model, our distributed system model, as the one that Bitcoin is secure under, that I showed you the pass at L. If you want to know, that's a synchronous model. The delta, the network lag, is short enough relative to the interblock time. So all that is good. But now I'm going to assume that there's an attacker. An attacker can buy compute at the same cost as the honest guys do. So Amazon sells you hash rate. You can buy unlimited amount of hash rate from Amazon, unbounded. It's, of course, a model. But the idea is like to explore kind of like what are the assumptions under which we can get security for Bitcoin. So let's say that hash rate is just completely available, fluid, like kind of no fixed cost whatsoever. You can ramp up as much mining or down as much mining as you want instantaneously. The merchant wants to verify a transaction in the ledger. So now Bitcoin doesn't give me what does it mean finality. But let's say the merchant will have to choose some kind of level, saying like once it's 6 blocks deep, 12 blocks deep, some number of blocks deep, it's going to be finalized as much as I'm concerned, meaning that I'm going to release the goods at that point. I'm going to make an irreversible decision where I'm going to say, given that I see something, I'm going to say this transaction must go into the ledger, and it must be in the ledger forever, and everybody else would accept it forever. You can wait. You can wait for the block to be very deep. You can also listen to the network and monitor. Like there's services like chain analysis that say, like, let's look at all the activity on the blockchain or off the blockchain. Let's see whatever is happening. You can do that too. Okay. So the merchant does all of that. How much does it cost for the attacker to reverse a transaction to violate consistency for an attacker for a merchant that employed all those security measures? And the argument is that it's 0. The answer that we give is 0. Why? What will you do as an attacker? First, you're gonna sit until the merchant confirmed the transaction, and until the merchant finalized the transaction. So the merchant can listen to whatever they want, but they're not going to hear anything because the attacker did not do anything. Once the merchant finalized the transaction, completely confirmed it, and that's he gave the goods or whatever it is, now the attacker starts making blocks that fork the old chain. So you take a block, you build a parallel chain that undoes the block that you're interested in, and you just build a lot of those blocks. You build them really fast, you overtake the honest chain, and now you're going to be the longest chain. And by that, you throw away the transaction. You throw away all the blocks that were in the old chain and all their data, including the transaction that you wanted to invalidate. How much does it cost you? Well, you need to create a block. The cost per block is that you need some D hashes per block. That's the difficulty, times C. So each hash costs you C. You need some, in expectation, some D hashes per block, C. But if the attack is successful, you overtake the honest chain, you get everybody switched to your chain. That means that you get the rewards from that chain. And the point is that because you mine blocks at the same cost as the honest guys, honest guys do not lose money when they mine blocks. All he did is mine blocks. So you cannot lose money either. Essentially, the cost of mining a block must be equal to the reward because the honest guys don't lose money. And then you can ask, what's the probability of success? Probability of success is close to 1 under this model where you can just mine the blocks as quickly as you want. And, so that looks very weird. But let me give you kind of like a bit of like how I think of the intuition for this in distributed systems. Why does Bitcoin allow you to do this? So I said, if the protocol is operating in an environment where the network delay is low, we're guaranteed consistency and liveness. That was the previous theorem. What happens if the network delay is very high? The extreme version of this is just network partition. There's North America, South America, and they cannot talk to each other. Just messages cannot get delivered between the two. What happens under the protocol? Protocol just keeps on going, and the two chains churn on, and they're going to be different chains because they can't talk to each other. They can't have the same data. If at some point the network partition resolves, and you get to communicate again, now you learn about each other's blocks. What the protocol says is, at this point, you just resolve the partition by accepting the longest chain. And this is the crazy part. All the people in South America just happened the bad luck of being the shorter chain. So basically, all the data that you wrote just gets deleted, and you replace it with a top guy. So what the attacker did essentially is just pretend they were North America. I just was partitioned. What the attacker does is, I want to siphon off, like I want to erase this block. I just mine all of this, and I resist the block. And when you release those blocks, it just looks to everybody like, oh, there was some guy who was partitioned. I didn't hear about those blocks at the time, but now it looks like we just got back together. And now some huge amount of money power just got revealed, and like suddenly we do this network reconciliation. And the crazy thing about the protocol is this network reconciliation can just throw away data. Of course, they can maliciously abuse this. And what's even crazier is like people say, well, if there's some kind of attack like this, maybe there will be a currency collapse or other things. Implicitly saying that people will know. And if you look at, of course, people will know, because you look at this block got delivered to me after this block. So what are the what are the reasons that can cause it? Either that I had a network partition and some huge amount of mining power got partitioned away and just got reconnected. It was like this big surprise. Of course, that's quite unlikely. Or somebody maliciously just mined this block and released this like late, or mined the block not at the time where they were supposed to. So when people say, well, if there was a double spend attack, we'll know. Yeah, we can know. We can see the timestamps here. The timestamps kind of basically tell you if you were awake at the time, you could see that this block arrived at the wrong time. Okay? So that's something that you can potentially exploit. We'll exploit this when we come to our protocol. I'm doing very badly on time, so let me go a bit more faster. Okay? So all those arguments are kind of things that like people noted before in some version. Yeah? Basically, this reconciliations opens up Bitcoin to attacks. And in a way, you can think as if Bitcoin cannot distinguish who's an attacker, to kind of allow this network reconciliation when somebody was partitioned, and you cannot say, oh, you're not a partitioned agent, you're an attacker, then you cannot punish attackers. If you don't punish attackers, just like honest nodes, it's costless to be an honest node. And if an attacker pretends to be an honest node, they're not going to pay any penalty. Yeah? Okay. Okay. One other kind of answer to this double spend attack problem is saying, well, maybe there's some fixed cost component. Maybe this rental model is problematic because miners have stake in the game. A lot of miners use ASICs, so dedicated hardware that's used just for Bitcoin. If something would happen, then community will know. So something outside the protocol will happen that will make all the ASICs less valuable, and that will punish them, and therefore the miners will not want to see that attack happen, and that should defend the system. Okay. So let's just change the model a bit. So attacker cannot procure mining power. No. And there's going to be a fixed set of miners. Attacker cannot kind of get mining power by himself. So I'm changing the economic model. The distributed system model is the same. Economic model is that attacker can only kind of try to create incentives for the miners, but not mine himself. And the community may be able to detect attacks, some form of community. I'm just going to capture all the possible harms to the miners from an attack by some CA, some loss of from attack, cost of attack. Okay? The thing I want to still assume is that miners are still profit maximizing. They still care about like their incentives, and I'm just going to focus on what incentives are doing to secure the system. And what the attacker will do is it's just going to try to work through the incentives. What he's going to do is just pay some reward for each block in the attack chain. He says, I cannot mine myself, but I'll pay all the miners that will produce some block in this attack chain that I'm creating. Importantly, I'm going to guarantee that you get some reward for each block in the attack chain, whether the attack succeeds or not. If the attack succeeds, then the attacker collects the rewards. So now from the miner's perspective, you can either attack or be honest. Let's say you mine one block. If you mine the attack chain, you're going to get the reward from the attack block, this R tilde. If the attack is successful, you're going to lose CA. If you mine an honest block, then if the attack is successful, you're going to get nothing because this block is going to get thrown away. And if that attack fails, you're going to get your. What you would want to see is that an attacker compares whether I want to attack and suffer the consequences of an attack versus not attacking. But if miners are small and not pivotal, the colors are not really working here. But if the miner is small and not pivotal, then think of infinitesimal miners. An attacker thinks whether I mine an attack block or an honest block doesn't really change whether the attack fails or succeeds. If I think the attack fails, and this R tilde is bigger than what I get for the honest block, then I should attack. If I think the attack is successful, I should also attack. I should definitely attack. Yeah? So by just rewarding the miners with the same reward as the honest chain, the attacker can make a dominant strategy for the attackers to just mine the attack chain. Basically, you get strategy of the commons, right? If you're not pivotal for the attack success, the CA does not really enter into your decision. Okay, so this says that even if you kind of really seriously take into account the fact that miners have like stake in the game, they're not going to get incentives from stake in the game if they're small. And partly it's because they're also anonymous. When you have anonymous miners, it means that they're going to get punished for an attack, whether they attacked or not. So there's no kind of personal accountability. And in settings with small anonymous participants, we know that incentives are not going to function well. That's kind of classic tragedy of the commons. Okay? So taking two kind of extreme economic models, it's kind of hard to explain why you don't see attacks. It doesn't seem like the mining rewards really protect the Nakamoto blockchain, Bitcoin, from being attacked. Some chains were attacked, but Bitcoin was not, although there was potentially a lot of money on the line. So what explains why they weren't attacked? So one thing that you can, there's a lot of things we can point to, like running out of time. So I'm just gonna, so we have some discussion in the paper, put a draft up. But you can think of rule of law, just general kind of all sort of measures to protect us against general theft. Most of them are pretty unsatisfying in the sense that it's not really a distributed system. You think that it's protected by the fact that you're going to be prosecuted in rule of law. But one thing that can sort of help is what I pointed out, that the attack is detectable. And you can think that the community will respond by just crushing the exchange rate or doing some other thing that's better for miner, just leaving it. But the community can also respond by just saying, well, let's just have a fix. Let's have a hard fork that just undoes all the harm of the attack. Ethereum has precedence for that. When they got an attack on the DAO, they said, well, you know, like the protocol strictly, literally says like that's what we should do, but the spirit of the rules we all agreed on is we should just fix this. And you can think that an attacker suffers a great loss if that happens, and that's the risk that deters an attacker. Incidentally, Ethereum was not attacked. Ethereum Classic, which is the protocol that deviates from, that split off from Ethereum, saying like, no, we need to do literally what the protocol does and never intervene. That got attacked many times, and they didn't fix it. So, kind of, they're kind of on brand. Okay, so so at this point we kind of look at this and say there's a positive and kind of negative part of it. One is like that if the answer is that the community can respond to attacks, we kind of need to have a bit of a more formal model to kind of understand what does it mean for the community to do stuff. Can the community come to agreement on how to fix the ledger? Can they all know which is the true honest ledger and which was the attack? Like there's some details here to work out. But there's also a kind of positive side to that, that maybe if the community can negate the attack, maybe we can just bake the community response into the protocol itself. So maybe we can just take whatever measures the community should be taking and just make the nodes automatically do them. And that's how we kind of come up with what we call stubborn Nakamoto. And the kind of idea is, let's kind of just have something that if you see some conflicts in the network or problems, either fix them immediately or raise the alarm bells and halt. If you think of a financial system, if you go to you take your credit card to a gas station that lost communication, they're not going to tell you, oh, we'll petition from the network, let's keep on like kind of printing things and let's reconcile them later. No, they halt. So we kind of want to take this kind of idea into this protocol too and say, if you're in a synchronous network, you're not sure about transactions, let's halt when you need. And let's kind of try to just get the nodes to communicate with each other in a way that's kind of equivalent of a check. When you want to cash a check and you're not sure whether there's enough balance in the account, you call the bank. So let's try to do that. And just kind of incidentally, here's like a screen from Square, some credit card processor. They basically tell you, you need to be online. If you're not connected to the network and you're trying to accept credit cards, we can't guarantee that they're correct. So here's the protocol. Basically, those two bullets describe everything that you need to change Nakamoto to do. So it's still going to be a very similar version of Nakamoto, but two things. One is we're going to have an explicit finality rule. So in Bitcoin, there's no explicit finality. It's like everybody can decide their own. Here it's going to be important that everybody agrees on what the finality rule is. And we're going to have some K. If you see some block that's K deep, then you're going to wait 2 delta, where delta is the network delay, how long it takes for a message to travel in the network. You're going to wait 2 delta. And those two deltas, think of this as calling the bank to see if there are conflicts. So just saying, I think I should confirm this block. I should finalize this. But before that, I'm just going to wait a bit and see whether there are any conflicts in the network. If there's no conflict, finalize. If there are conflicts, halt. Okay? Once I finalize the block, I'm just going to ignore anything that contradicts a finalized block. Okay? Okay. So this called the bank idea. And now, what will happen if somebody tries to do a double spend attack? I run the protocol. At time 6, let's say this got K confirmations. Okay? Those nodes wait 2 time periods, 2 delta legs. Okay? And they finalize this block, let's say in the blocks before that. Okay? And now, at some later time, somebody comes and sends an attack chain. The top node says, like, no, I can just ignore this. Why can I ignore this? I've finalized this last block. When I finalize this block, I communicate with the rest of the network, and I know that all the other miners also finalized their last block. If I finalized my block, and I know that somebody else did, I can ignore this other chain, knowing that everybody else will as well. Oh, that's kind of like the very hand-wavy intuition. Oh. The term, I think I need to skip the, I don't have proofs, but I have like some proof sketches. The theorem says that the stubborn Nakamoto is always consistent. So it's impossible to have a consistency violation. It's impossible to deceive somebody to think that the transaction will finalize and then reverse it, no matter what the compute power of the others, no matter what like the attacker can do. Yeah? And that basically says economic security is infinity. Like we gave up on using incentives or something. So we get basically infinite economic security here. Yeah? Of course, this is only useful if you get liveness as well. Like one way to get consistency is just never write anything to your ledger, then nothing is wrong. Under essentially the same, it's not exactly the same. You need something slightly more than what Nakamoto does, but very slightly, you get both consistency and liveness. And the idea for the first part, let me just give you the two ideas. So the idea for the first part, why is it always consistent? Well, suppose somebody confirmed some block, somebody confirmed another block. Because I weigh 2 delta, it's impossible that both of them confirm the block without hearing about the other. If at least one of the two of us must have heard of both blocks, they will know of the conflict and halt it. So the idea is super simple in a way. It's just like if you know about conflicts, you stop. That's all you need. Yeah, that's the assumption. The assumption is synchrony. We're not allowing for that. If you have this partition, of course, like you can still have. Yeah. The consistency liveness, the kind of like the one-line proof sketch, is that the only change that I did from the protocol, from the Nakamoto protocol, is when I have conflicts. If I don't have conflicts, this thing acts exactly like the original protocol. Or I should say almost exactly. If you added a 2 delta window, that's like the why I keep saying approximately. But except for that, you basically behave the same as like the original Nakamoto. And if I don't have consistency violation of the original Nakamoto, I would have liveness. Yes. I think I'll go over time, so I'll have to ask you offline. Yeah. Let me ask you offline. Yeah. Okay. So I have a couple of comments, but they see that I'm over time. Let me just kind of like finish with those 3 examples. That I think that if you think about where kind of distributed systems or like this blockchain kind of like where can it shine? Yeah? I think that's like open infrastructure, open source infrastructure, or open source on steroids, because now you can have all sort of other tools that kind of Linux does not have. Linux does not have a baked-in payment system into it. Bitcoin does. Yeah? So that's a great thing that I think we should try to build. And if we try to kind of think of organizations that are kind of promoting public goods and decentralized or something like that, here are 3 examples. We should be like 2 of them and not the 3rd. Yeah, I'm not going to name names who's who. Okay. Yeah. So thank you all very much. And I'll stay here if you have any questions. No.